Hello and welcome back. Now we have the Dries Q&A. So I'm Rachel Lawson, Community Liaison at the Drupal Association. I think you've probably met me by now on Drupalcon this year. Again, we have Heather Rocker with us as Executive Director, and of course, Dries. How did you feel after finishing your Dries note this year?
I don't know, it feels good. I haven't seen any reactions because, I don't know, we use this other tool and I can't see the chat. But yeah, I'm glad there was no hiccups.
It went really well.
Yeah, yesterday I had like a 4-hour power outage and I'm like, oh no, I hope I don't lose power. And I didn't lose power, so that's a win. I'm happy.
It is, it absolutely is. So we should get started. So the Dries Q&A, we try to ask questions from the audience primarily. And this year we have a lovely tool called Slido, which you should be able to see on your screens now. Ironically, because we're in StreamYard, I cannot see the same screen as you. However, what I have in front of me are all the questions. Now you can post questions in there. I'm not going to ask the questions in the order that they appear. I'm going to ask questions that help promote a flow of the conversation between Dries, Heather, and myself. And I'm also going to try and prioritize questions that fit in with that flow and have names on them. If you put names on them, then I'm more likely to ask them. So please do start asking your questions now. That would be really great. We've already got a few from a few people in the system, so that would be great.
And Rachel, just so you know, I'm not in Hopin right now. I'm actually only in StreamYard, so you'll have to read the questions, I think.
I will read the question.
Okay,
yeah.
I can see them.
I will read the question. Absolutely, don't worry. Okay, so I tell you what, we'll start with. We always like to start with an easy one to get into us. So, Dries, where did you get that fabulous Drupal wall art?
Actually, it's a neon sign. I can light it on. Yeah. Let me show you. Actually, I have a little remote here. Can you see that? I keep it on my desk. So many people ask about it. Like, look at this. I can do different modes. I mean, this is a little intense, but it's pretty cool. I found like a little boutique shop, I guess. I think it's just one person. I think her name was Lottie, and she makes those. I think it was about $200 for a custom neon sign, which is not cheap.
Wow, that's not bad.
But it's also doable. Maybe if we all order one, we can get a group discount. I wonder what they would cost if we ordered 500.
Oh, I like it.
It'd be the perfect Christmas gift.
It could, absolutely. Well, we should talk. I mean, obviously, maybe we could have it on the Drupal swag shop at some stage. That would be amazing.
I can share if people are interested. I'll tweet the link of the company. I think it's just a one-person company, really, that makes them. But I'll tweet it out.
Okay, that would be fantastic. So we should really talk about the Dries note and some of the things that you mentioned there. And I'd like to start with something that's very close to my heart, and that is contribution. You mentioned that individual contributors and organizational contributors are very sticky. They are staying around, definitely staying around, which is great. But does that mean we still need to attract new users and contributors?
Yes. I mean, the other side of how sticky groups of people are or individuals are, like the other side is like we also have to bring new people into the project and enable them to become contributors. So there's always people leaving. So the key is to bring more people in than leave. And the good news is if attrition rates are low, if people stay, you don't actually have to bring in that many new people to grow, right? Like it's when you have a lot of people leaving that it's really hard to grow. But the good news here is like, people are actually staying. So that provides a little bit of relief in terms of how many people we need to bring in. But I don't think it's the right way to look at this problem, to be quite honest. Like, I think the better way is like, we need to innovate more. There's so many cool things we can do, and we just need more help, and we really benefit from new people and fresh perspectives and sort of the diverse and clever ideas that come from new people. So it's just a very healthy thing to bring in more people. And it's also, frankly, really rewarding. As much as I love working with some of the Drupal veterans, if you will, I just love it when I see somebody kind of like up and comers, when I see somebody come in and make things happen and then kind of grow their responsibilities in the Drupal project. It's personally one of the most rewarding things to see.
That's great. I wonder, Heather, if there's any ways that we at the Drupal Association can be helping with that.
Yes, and I would layer into what Dries was mentioning, that it's not even about, some go out and some go in, right? And it's also about, there needs to be some succession planning. So one thing that we hear a lot is this concept of burnout and stress, and that's just natural and it's human condition. And so it does not behoove us to assume that people can do the same things for an unlimited amount of time. It's not fair. It's not fair to community members. So wouldn't it be lovely if we had a pipeline ready to go, learning things alongside these Drupal leaders so that they can take a breath or step back if they need to without worrying that they're going to cause harm to the project or let something drop. So I think it's also about taking new talent, and not just new talent to Drupal, but talent within the current community, and elevating that so that people are learning and doing new things, and that you could stay in the Drupal community for 25, 30 years, but wouldn't it be lovely to get to do different things along the way and to have people that you've mentored behind you so that you can do that without fear? So I think that's a part of it that we think about too. And I think, we talk about all the process and tools, but if we think about truly the first part of the pipeline, which is let's bring new people in, we're actually doing some stuff that's really cool right now, which is reaching out to the student population. And that's a piece that in the 2 years that I've been here, I keep hearing about, we need to do it. And there just really hasn't been a systematic way to make that happen. So we're seeing some really great pilot programs pop up, both in North America and beyond, where we're testing some opportunities to really connect to technical colleges and learning programs and nonprofit organizations like we're doing with Discover Drupal. So we're connecting with organizations and schools to say, if you've got talent that you have access to, we would love for them to consider a career in Drupal, and we'll make that happen. Connecting through Google to a program that helps historically Black colleges and universities, which happen to happen here in Atlanta, where I am, where Angie and Tim from my team went and did a webinar and talked to those students about what Drupal is and what a career looks like and why it's awesome and why our community is a place to be. So I think the ability for us to try some things at the Drupal Association and then work with the community at large to say, how do we scale those across the globe and do more of that work? And I think that's the piece where we can test and pilot things. And then we need to pivot to say, how do we make this scalable? And how do we make this have a global reach so that we're consistently pulling in talent, not just at the student side, but anybody in their career that wants to be part of Drupal. My ultimate vision is that you go to Drupal.org and there's literally a map that you can see, and it takes you along the pathway of a Drupal career, and that you can say, this is where I am. And it points you directly to tools and resources that take you from where you are to where you want to go. So that's my vision of where I want us to be from a resources and support perspective, in addition to a program perspective.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Help me build it.
Well, I mean, it's exactly why we started building the contributor roles documentation, with that exact idea that someone could say, well, I'm in this role, but what are my next opportunities? What am I learning? What skills am I learning here that will help me move to there and continue to get the interest and growth and everything as we continue on our contributor journey or contributor career? Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about bringing people in there. Dries, you talked about a lot of the components that we'd like to build, which seems like a great opportunity for people to come into the project and contribute. If we build these components you mentioned, is there anything else that is needed to make Drupal a great headless CMS?
Yeah, first of all, on these components, I think there's a lot of components we can build. If you need ideas, happy to share some. But the other thing I'd love to see more of is better documentation. So if somebody wants to build a component, like they can just go to this beautiful, documentation, if you will, and just figure out all the steps involved. So we make that really easy. And I think we have some more work to do. So I'd love to see more work in that area. But I think to answer your real question, I think the other thing that would be super, super impactful is a headless install profile. And I actually showed it in my slides, but I don't think I talked about it because I was already running overtime. But, I think there's different kinds of installation experiences. First of all, a lot of people use Drupal in hybrid mode, is what I call it. So they use the headless capabilities combined with the traditional capabilities. And for those people, the current install profile is great, right? But if you want to go pure headless, let's call it, and you don't want any of the traditional capabilities for a traditional front end, the current installation experience is not great because we turn on all of these features, bells and whistles for a traditional front end. And then you have to go in and disable a whole bunch of things and enable some other things. And then you can build your headless, pure headless application. So I would love to see one or more install profiles that are kind of aligned with these different ways of building Drupal sites, right? Like Umami is great for like an evaluator experience, but then you should be able to say like traditional front end, you should be able to maybe pick headless. And then, Drupal itself at installation time kind of pre-configures everything to be optimized for that use case. I think that would be big. That would be, and it's like not that hard, I think, it's like we have done install profiles for a long time. So again, it's waiting for somebody to take on, I think. And I'd love to see that happen. That would be great.
Yeah, that would be amazing, actually. There's a lot we can do to how install profiles work that we might need to change around so that we could do that really effectively. I would love to see what people would do if we said, hey, let's change install profiles. How would we do that? And maybe have headless things as part of that. Could be really interesting. So Ron Northcutt asked a question that seems to lead on quite well from that. We are 20 years old. Goodness me, Drupal, it's incredible. We've got to this stage already. Oh, we kind of have to think of the future. What are we going to do? So Ron asks, based on the way you see the industry going, what changes might you want to make for Drupal to keep it relevant in another 20 years from now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe I should dedicate a whole keynote on this next time. But I have a few ideas. And it's funny, I was talking to some people, just to digress for a second, and they're like, we would love to hear kind of like, what's the big vision for Drupal? Like you put out this notion of Drupal is for ambitious digital, and people feel like we've achieved that, great. We're there, like, and we are, like, if you look at the numbers, like even just like, let's say in the enterprise, Drupal is bigger than Adobe Sitecore, Optimizely combined. And so I think there's kind of this notion of like, we are the number one. And I think people are eager to kind of like, all right, then what's next, right? And oftentimes I feel like that's where this vision question comes from. And I don't have the best answer right now. I will put it together maybe for the next Dries note, but I do know some things. And they're not the most, between quotes, like sexy things. And here's, and there's a great story actually of Jeff Bezos. He was asked a similar question. I may have told this already, but he was asked like, what's the next shiny object for Amazon? And he told the reporter, it's like the wrong question to ask. And he said, the right question to ask is, what will not change in the next 10 or 20 years? Because every investment you make in that is going to be a great investment. Right?
Yes.
And so for Amazon, it's things like customers want faster shipping. They want their products to show up quicker. or they want shipping to be cheaper. And so Amazon literally spent, billions of dollars in making shipping faster with, buying planes and drones and all the crazy things they do, building warehouses. And if you apply that idea, like people are often looking, when they ask me that question, they're looking for what's the next shiny object. And I can talk about shiny objects all day long, and I'm happy to, but I think the more relevant question might also be what is not going to change. And there's a variety of different things that won't change. One is I'm 100% convinced that we'll have more content to manage in 10 years. This is a multi-decade trend, right? Like think about 10 years ago, we had X amount of content. Today, we have way more content. And in 10 years from now, we'll have even more content. I know for a fact that security will become more important. Like 10 years ago, people weren't really concerned with risk management as much as they are today. People didn't lose sleep over, but they should have, but they didn't really lose that much sleep over getting hacked or data privacy or all the kinds of risks that organizations have. And today that's a big topic. And I think in 10 years ago, it will be even bigger topic. I think we'll have more, more data. We'll have to build data-driven digital experiences. We'll have more personalization. It won't be all cookie cutter like most websites today. I've told that story too. I can go into detail. So I think a lot, and I think this notion of things like Layout Builder are great too, like WYSIWYG, drag and drop. Like we've been on a multi-decade trend for more low-code, no-code kind of solutions. And I think that will continue this trend that we need to empower the site builder or the less technical marketer or the content creator. You don't always have to go to developer teams to do things. These are all trends, and Headless, I think you talked about that in the Dries note today. I think Headless is an important trend, and it's driven by a couple of different things, like obviously JavaScript front ends, but also the need for multi-channel publishing, like to push content not just to websites, but to mobile applications, obviously, but increasingly more things like chatbots, voice assistants, digital kiosks, all these things. And so these are there's at least 5 or 6 big trends that won't change. They will only accelerate. But it's kind of more of the same too. And therefore, maybe it's not the most exciting for a lot of people. But I would say we're really well positioned for all of these trends. We're really good at managing more content. Like our content modeling tools are better than others. I think our headless capabilities are better than others. The way we do security, it's better than anything else I've seen, honestly, in the industry. And so a lot of it is more of the same. So not very sexy. I'm happy to throw in a few shiny objects. But we'll be busy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you say exactly right. We have been around for 20 years, and we have brought lots of new things in. Drupal is not the same thing that it was 10 years ago, never mind 20 years ago, and yet it is the same.
Right. The core problems are the same.
The problems are the same. Absolutely. I'm just thinking, actually,
that's a good
Heather,
thing, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a good thing. Yeah.
But at the same time, everything has changed, Rachel, right? The way we do releases. Our innovation model. Like Headless, we didn't talk about that 10 years ago, or we started to maybe. So there is a lot of changes too, and we have to constantly evolve. The drop is always moving, but the core problems are fundamentally the same.
The way we go about them, the actual impetus to go about doing them is consistent, is what I mean. Yeah.
Yes.
Whatever opportunities we come across. So talking of how we deal with things like that, when we're talking about how the product should change, I probably should put this almost the same question to Heather. And maybe in the next 20 years, how do we support the project changing at places like the Drupal Association?
So, I think we're really laying the groundwork for that now. So I know a lot of folks have heard me talk about the end of last year. Dries and the board helped me put together a strategic plan for the organization. And so we're focused on, what matters the most over the next 3 years. How do we focus our limited resources to have the greatest impact on the project? And then, we're also looking at how do we measure success for those things. And so what's baseline to that I think, whether the strategic plan was 3 years or 30 years, is that we do what's necessary from a people, process, and tools perspective so that contribution can happen the way we need it to happen, right? And so, Dries talked about today, we may see fluctuations up and down in contribution, and part of that is circumstance, and part of that is maturity of the project and what we need when we need it. I think that, a few of the important things we can do is make sure that, and we see this in things like, I'm ready to be a maker in the chat today, right? There are people that want to be contributors. So I feel personally responsible. And Rachel, you're on my team, so you're responsible too. But we feel a huge responsibility that if you want to contribute, that we will be your go-to resource to help you get started on that journey. On the flip side of that, we want to be the resource and support for the people that make that happen, right? So the experienced contributors, the contribution mentors, the leaders of the project that have the knowledge and experience. So it's getting the right people to the right places and supporting the people that hold the knowledge and the ability to incorporate that contribution into what we're doing. But I think it means really helping people understand what unique talents they bring to the project and where those can be best utilized and what's needed when. And there's this matchmaking. Dries, you and I have talked about it, that matchmaking component of get the talent to the right place for the right thing. And that's a complicated system. But if we peel it back, what we're doing at the Drupal Association is saying, okay, let's look at the Drupal project and its community as a volunteer organization. So if we look at how nonprofits would generally attack this problem, they would use some classic volunteer management processes. And so that's really what we're doing, is taking basic proven techniques to understand how to get people to the right places. And we've kind of stepped into that, Rachel, with things like our contribution guide, right? And so there's the contribution guide about all things that are available to happen, but you can see it in really tactical ways. The way that we started even recruiting for things like Drupalcon volunteers, Drupalcon contributors. We're using a system where you fill out a form and we understand not only your availability and your interests, but we now understand what strengths you bring to the table and what skills you want to learn. And we take all that information and do literally a matchmaking process on the back end. So that's a bit of a pilot for how can we potentially use that kind of concept on a larger scale across all of the community and all contribution. And so there's that people piece, there's the hands-on matchmaking, there's all the stuff Tim talked about in Dries' note about how are we affecting processes and tools improvement. And so while the basics of Drupal will stay the same over the next 20 years, the way that we need to engage people and the way that we need to improve process and tools will probably be always ongoing. So I think at the Drupal Association, it's understanding where's our best use at that time and how do we step in the right places.
I think that's spot on. I have an additional thought.
Oh,
if that's okay. But if you're thinking 20 years, right? Like what's I think the Drupal Association has a very big role in sort of leading the way and showing the world how open source is done and done well. And I'm very passionate about that because for two reasons, I guess. One, I have this fundamental belief that every technology company in the world, if you will become an open source company, has to become an open source company. Today, it's a fraction of all the companies. Think about how many technology companies there are. Like almost none of them are truly open source companies, right? And so figuring out ways to make open source organizations, open source businesses, the supporting partners, as well as the Drupal Association itself, sustainable and growing and healthy. I think it's a very big part of what we need to do. And it's partially rooted not only in making Drupal successful, obviously that's very near and dear to my heart, But also, I think I want it to be a playbook for other open source projects, because we've figured out so many things that others haven't. But there's even a larger picture in my mind, which I think there is a set of problems in the world that can only be solved by open source. And I even think about things like, I mean, if you take back, there's a set of problems that we really struggle to solve. Like climate change should be one of them. You know, in our context, you know, building, let's say, a pro-privacy, anti-monopoly open web, like a true open web. Like I can tell you, Facebook will not build this, Twitter will not build this. No commercial company will build a truly pro-privacy, anti-monopoly open web, right? The only way we're going to build this is through open source. Yes, it's us. And I mean, not only us, but open source in general. But we also need to think about how do we make sure we can build this open web and have it be around for 200 years, 300 years, 400 years, a long time, not just 5 years or 10 years, right? And I think, again, it's why open source needs to grow, why more businesses need to become more open source businesses, why the Drupal Association needs to help figure out how to sustain open source communities and the businesses around it. It's big. And if we don't, then I think the open web could kind of like wither away. And if we do, we can show the world how we solve large multi-stakeholder problems at a global scale with open source. And I think we can then apply those lessons to other large multi-stakeholder problems that we're not solving. And climate change is one of them. And honestly, I don't know how we can help solve climate change right now, but I do know that the governance models that we may put in place and the way we work together across industry, across companies, across countries, like we need more of that in the world, you know? And again, it's not going to come from, you know, large technology companies. Like it has to come from somewhere else. And so anyhow, I'm kind of on a tangent, but there's all the things that Heather said, which are really important. And then that leads to other things, which are also really important. So I think the Drupal Association is really important, you know?
And I think too, you know, what that highlights, Dries, is the fact that there's all the work that we do within the project and within our community, but to get to the vision that you're describing, we really have to be able to collaborate outside our own kind of Drupal walls, right? And so we have to be able to coordinate and collaborate with other organizations, whether they're open source or corporate or governmental or nonprofit, to have those conversations, to make those connections, to do that advocacy, to get along the way. So I think that's a piece where an advocacy for Drupal is in our strategic plan, but I think if we take that up a level, it's this advocacy for open source and what open source makes possible. And I know, Dries, you and I believe wholeheartedly in how it can have a positive impact on the world. And so I'd love to be able to, for the Drupal Association to be a catalyst in making those connections and into forging those collaborations so that we can start to see some of that happen.
Yeah, and a lot of it is capacity building, to be quite honest. Like it's becoming bigger. You know, like I know it's not necessarily something that inspires a lot of people, but the question isn't really like, how do we grow the number of Drupal contributors by 10%? It's like, how do we, you know, 10x the number of Drupal contributors and the impact that the Drupal Association can have in not just making the ecosystem successful, but also like, you know, helping to build and protect that open web. And we're up against large forces that are many, many times bigger. So one of the questions is, how do we become a little bit bigger so that we have a louder voice, so we can have more impact, and we can actually be sort of a counterbalance or a counterweight to some of the things that are happening in the world. And that requires us to grow, you know, like it or not, but it requires us to grow because it will increase
that's
our
how
impact.
you get a greater voice.
Yeah.
So you talk a lot about things like that, and you Aaron McHale was just saying you always have a really good insight into open source and clearly other things as well. And he asks, are there any sites or blogs that you like to follow? Who are your key opinion leaders, I guess, to keep up with the wider communities? And I think what I'm sure this is something that you could tweet about later, or even write a blog post. I know you're trying to get back into blogging.
I know I'm not very good at getting back into it.
I know I'm pretty terrible. But add to that, because really for the conversation now is, how do you decide what and who to listen to?
Yeah, it's a great question. People ask me sometimes, do you have any role models, that kind of stuff? And the reality is that I have many, and I'm not like, it's different for everybody, I think. But like, I use RSS, for example. I love RSS feeds. Call me old school, but I like not having algorithms decide what I read. So I have an RSS reader, and I have probably 1,000 feeds in it, a lot of feeds. And I constantly add and remove people. So I've built my own kind of, curated list of people that I follow. And I will say I take inspiration from all of them. I know it sounds a little cheesy, but I'm not one that follows like one or two people, or like, Steve Jobs, my role model. I want to be like Steve Jobs. I mean, it would be great to be like Steve Jobs, don't get me wrong. But what my point is, I really see learning opportunities from a lot of different places. And I get a lot of different inputs, I guess, in forming my own opinions. I spend probably an hour or two reading a day. Just to, I don't know if people realize that. Yeah, I read a lot, and it tends to be a lot of different things. And all of these things combined, I guess, is, and I know a lot of it is not just RSS feeds, but just interactions. Like, I think ideas evolve by having conversations with people too. So, I admire a lot of people in the world. I admire some of the things Steve Jobs has done. I admire Bill Gates. For example, Bill Gates, I think it's amazing how he has been sort of persistent in doing things for long periods of time. Like, he dedicated a lot of time to Microsoft. Now he's dedicating the rest of his life to his foundation, and like, that's inspirational to me, versus people that switch things every 6 months or every 2 years. Like, that commitment and loyalty to a cause, I think, is inspirational. That doesn't mean I love everything about Bill Gates. Obviously, there's things that I don't support, and the same thing is true for everyone. But I think there is things I've learned a lot of things from Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, and is been a role model for certain things, and then he's been the opposite of a role model for other things too. But I believe in picking up different bits and pieces from a lot of different people. So maybe I'll write a blog post about it.
It sounds like a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Heather? Any kind of inspirational things, how you go about finding who to listen to?
I think for me, it's less of kind of strictly following people, and I tend to be following kind of subjects and topics. So especially depending on what we're trying to accomplish, or what's our vision and goals, and how do we do that. And I think last year in particular was getting really entrenched with diversity, equity, and inclusion voices and leaders, and in better understanding how we not only get better in the communities where we live, but how we take those lessons and bring them to our Drupal community. So there are things like that. And then there are things, how do you address change and innovation? And a lot of the research I've been doing lately around communities of innovation and how to bring that back to Drupal, and what does that mean for us? So it's really more kind of, what topic are we chewing on right now, and how do I go find a lot of different voices and perspectives to be able to do that?
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Sounds good. Yeah. So Dries, at the Drupal Association, we have actually 3 fab new staff starting in the last week or so. Actually, it's really great, and they've really made it a great start. What lessons do you think they should learn, or they should take away from watching content from DrupalCon Europe?
I think honestly, I think I want them to, I don't know if it's a lesson, but like, I want them to become passionate about open source and Drupal, because as soon as people get passionate, amazing things happen, And so I don't know if it's a lesson, but I And this is why the in-person events are so valuable, and the virtual events are also valuable. But that spark, you know what I mean? The spark, the open source spark, that moment that you feel like, wow, this is awesome. And you walk in a room and there's 800 code sprinters or something, and you sit down and you end up sitting next to somebody that's been doing Drupal for 5+ years, 10 years, and he or she is going to help you, and all of a sudden you feel like empowered and kind of slowly fall in love with Drupal and open source. That's what them to experience. And it's not so much like what's the latest and the greatest on Composer 2, or what's up with CK Editor 4. Like, it's see the power of open source and the passion in the Drupal community.
I'm so excited that they are going to get to do that in Portland in April. So we have a large number of our staff, respectively compared to size. Rachel, as you mentioned, we have new people. We're able to now staff up from some of the cuts we had to do for the pandemic. But there's a good number of our staff that have been working really hard for the Drupal Association, but have never set foot in the building for a live DrupalCon. And I can't wait. I only got to go to one full DrupalCon so far, DrupalCon Amsterdam. I want to go.
It's kind of crazy, actually.
Yeah. I can't wait to see their faces and hear about their experience when it all comes together. And just the energy and the people in this community. I think because I had the opportunity to be in person before we went to virtual, I kind of could conjure that in my mind as we do these experiences. But for anybody here that hasn't been able to do a physical event yet, even if it's as things open up and you can do something in your local community, when it's safe to do so, do find your local Drupalists and join those local events and go to DrupalCon when you can, if possible, because just that connection is so unique and exciting and powerful that I can't wait to be able to do a version of it safely in Portland in April. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, not only that, but if you find yourself inspired by things that happen here, and we really want to get back into meeting again in person, then there is nothing stopping you out there doing that. Start small event, just a meetup, becoming a camp, whatever. There is no friction to you doing that. And if there's anybody who wants pointers, we have the event organizers working group. Please contact me. I'll put you in touch, and they will happily help you get started with a Drupal event and just take you through those first few steps. But you absolutely have the permission or whatever it is to go and do that. Everyone can run an event just like that. It's just getting people in a room and chatting Drupal. So yeah, absolutely.
I agree. And often it's as simple as every Monday night at 5 after work.
Yeah.
You have, a couple of pizzas or something, and people just consistently show up every Monday night from 5 to 7 or something, talk a little bit about Drupal, do a little bit of coding in a room with others. And these things then often kind of spiral and become larger camps and that kind of stuff. But it's not hard to say, hey, I'm going to open my office every Monday from 5 to 7, and I'm going to spend the 20 euros or pounds on a couple of pizzas.
Yeah, that is literally
it.
all it is. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's just taking that little tiny step, and that's how you get things going in your neighborhood. Simple as that.
It is.
Yeah. Well, that was fantastic. We've talked about a lot of subjects that are really quite out there. So I thought for this next bit, we'll maybe just look a bit kind of closer nearby. So people were talking about, you talked about the project browser. Exciting how fast that's coming along. But what could be next? And Aaron McHale suggested maybe that could be a voice content initiative.
Oh, yeah. I would be interested in learning more about that, actually. I think the project browser has a lot of potential. I think right now we're trying to just install modules, which is hard, and it's a great first step. But think about distributions. Like, how do we reinvent the notion of distributions through the project browser? Or solutions, like, because it's still like, all right, I want to build this kind of website. Now I need to figure out, I need to install these 7 modules, right? Like, but what if we could kind of package up things in solutions, distributions, and even configurations? Like, how can we share configurations? Could be like a very simple configuration could be content types. Like, I have the best configuration for newsletter content types or something, or press release content types, or whatever you want to. And it goes back to some very old concepts that we've had in Drupal many, many, many moons ago, like the features module. Some of you might have been around long enough, but
yeah.
Well, these are kind of cool ideas that we had, like ways to share configuration. And today we have the configuration management work in Drupal 8, and now you have Composer, and on top of that you have the project browser. We can kind of reinvent some of these old concepts in new ways, better ways, based on learnings from the past. And it could be really super cool extensions or parts of the project browser in my mind. So I think installing modules, awesome, really awesome, first great step. But how do we use that as jumping off point for even cooler things? So
yeah, absolutely. So something that was mentioned earlier on got me thinking, and that was around how we make opportunities for people to step into roles in the community. And I know that the opportunity I was given, I think it was in Drupalcon Dublin, where we literally, you and I, Dries, we had 5 minutes on stage where I got to ask you a couple of questions. And here we are today, where we've made it into a session of its own. And we've been talking for 3/4 of an hour, and it's amazing. But I actually think it's time for me to give somebody else a chance to run this and host this session. So I've been doing it for a few years now. So we're going to be looking out for people to do this, maybe in Portland, from the community. What type of people, who should we be looking for? What kind of people?
I mean, I think anyone that's interested in doing it, I think, maybe people that have, talents around kind of moderating conversations, and maybe a person that can kind of span the spectrum of questions that people want to ask me, right? Like, I think when these Q&As are most interesting to me personally, when we can have some technical questions, maybe some vision questions, some business questions if you like, or some, I don't know, like, so say somebody that can kind of cover all of these topics. Because I've had Q&As where it was like one technical question after the next, even sometimes to the point, like, so if you look at line 700 of this module in this file, it says this, what do you think of that? I was like,
I can imagine,
I don't know, but I can take a look, but it's only so interesting to so many people, right? That's my point. I don't mind technical questions, but yeah, I'd love for somebody. I've had some amazing Q&As with you, but also, with Josh from Pantheon. He's been really good. I also like when people ask me honest questions that maybe, honest, like to the point, direct, not, shooting it straight. Even if maybe it's a little tough question, that's fine too. I don't mind those.
I always try to fit in one or two.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dries, and thank you very much, Heather. Heather and I have to literally run across the virtual conference hall now to the Drupal Association staff and board Q&A.
There's more.
It's never ending. Yeah. So thank you very much. We will let you have a rest now, Dries, and enjoy the rest of DrupalCon.
Awesome. Well, I am actually in that meeting too.
Oh yeah.
We're all running. We're all running
Rachel.
to the same thing. But thanks, Rachel. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Heather, too. It was great.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Right. Bye.